Okay, so hello everyone. Nice to meet you today, and I would like to cordially welcome Andre Marques-Smith, our today's guest. Thank you so much, Andre, for accepting our invitation. And Andre has completed his PhD at the University of Oxford, and in his PhD he was mapping the development of sensory cortical neuronal circuits in neonatal rodents. And then after a postdoctoral project at King's College London, he recently joined Competence Technologies to work on building a wearable brain-computer interface. Very impressive, and thank you so much, Andrea, again for joining us today. And I'm very excited to hear your story from you. So let's start there. So I would be very happy to hear your version of, like, in your own words, like. What happened over the past few years? What are the motivations for your decision? And and what is your point of view today? And just tell us about your daily life today as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Scottish Portuguese, Scottish on my dad's side, Portuguese on my mother's. I did my undergrad in Portugal in psychology, with a particular focus on clinical neuropsychology in particular, and some general human behavior as well. And I wanted to, it became very clear to me early on in my undergrad that I was more interested in the basic science side of things, so brain behavior relationships rather than, necessarily actually helping people directly. That changed a lot over the years, actually. But that led to me applying to a PhD program in Oxford in order to be able to do this conversion from psychology into more biological neuroscience. That was a very, I think for most people, a very challenging time, PhD. There was a lot of imposter syndrome. Some issues with, experiments being difficult, taking a long time to actually get progress and manage to get results to go anywhere. And that was the first point in my career in which I seriously considered leaving academia behind. I didn't because of some very, very, very good mentors that I had in Oxford, and due to the fact that things started looking up and I started getting results. And from there, I moved to King's College for a postdoc, and that was a very productive time. I worked with Beatrice Rico and Oscar Marin. We didn't always see eye to eye, but in the end, we got along fine. But at that point, I decided, I'd done enough on developing circuits. I was getting more and more interested in how the mature brain actually works, how dynamics in neural circuits give rise to behavior, perception, cognition. And around that time, someone, Adam Kampf, a lecturer that I'd known for 5 years and was, kind of a big fan of, was moving to the Sainsbury Wellcome Centre in London. And the SWC was sort of becoming, a hot place to get to, both for experimental systems in neuroscience, but it was about to sort of envelop the Gatsby computational neuroscience unit, which is, one of the top theoretical neuroscience departments in the world. And after my time in King's College, once again, I was having a few questions about whether I really wanted to continue being a neuroscientist in the long run, or if there was something else that I was interested in doing with my life. And in deciding to go to SWC, I sort of took the sort of a compromise route. I thought, okay, SWC is going to be a great place to do experimental neuroscience for sure, but it's also going to be a very good place for me to pick up some coding skills, to improve my data analysis skills, to start getting exposed to theoretical and computational approaches. And if after a few years there I decided that, academia long-term wasn't for me, the years that I worked there would leave me equipped very well to move into a different career. And at the time, I was sort of thinking of data science as an alternative to staying in neuroscience. The postdoc that I did with Adam Kampf went very well. I sort of became very, very inspired to do work in neuroscience again. Started getting involved in more and more projects. And eventually finished the project with Adam and applied for and got a Henry Wellcome postdoctoral fellowship, which was a big deal for me because it was the third time that I'd applied for that fellowship, and finally I got it after, in both initial applications, not even getting past the prelim stage. So it sort of gave me a boost of confidence, which, awards and fellowships are worth what they are. They don't really, I don't think they say that much about your quality as a person or a scientist, but they can give you a life raft, something to cling on to when you have those moments of doubt and you don't know if you're doing the right thing or if you're going anywhere. And that's why that fellowship was so important to me. This was end of 2018. So I get into 2019, full speed, full of energy and power and vigor. I had a very productive first 6 months in 2019. This was working with Sonja Hoffer and Thomas Vogel. And I really enjoyed the work in the lab. They were both very good mentors. I had fantastic colleagues. But when I stopped that summer and went on holiday to see my brother in Norway, I felt that something wasn't clicking anymore. Something wasn't right. I found myself at some point, sitting outside in the midnight sun, enjoying a beer with my brother, and just feeling like I'd sacrificed a lot, and I was sacrificing a lot. I was living far away from people that I loved very much, my brother, my parents, everyone else. I had good mentors. I had bad experiences also. I saw sides of academia that I didn't know about when I first came in. And nothing, to me, my decision to leave and search for something else wasn't driven by any particular event. It was more, it just felt like every year that I spent, there was one more thing that I saw that just chipped away at this idea of utopia, which is what I came into the academic career with. And yeah, basically at that point, I knew this wasn't what I was going to do in the long run. I kind of always thought that academic neuroscience was going to be sort of the book of my life, and I realized then in that summer that actually it was just a chapter, that it was finishing, and I was about to start a new one. But the issue was that the next page in the book was blank. I basically had no idea what to do after. I've seen a couple of questions here that I'm going to start getting into a bit, because one thing I want to tell you a bit about before I start doing direct Q&A perhaps was the process of me getting out of academic neuroscience and more into machine learning, AI, and eventually brain-computer interfaces. So I think one issue that you can often have with people talking about their career trajectories is that it can be very easy to portray stuff as if there was a master plan, and you sort of chain things one after the other in order to get to a particular goal. Maybe it is like that for some people. I can only speak to myself. It wasn't like that for me at all. I started out just as you would approach a new project in science when you don't know anything about it. You start with a hypothesis, right? And it doesn't matter if your hypothesis is particularly good or not. What the thing that it does is that it gives you a direction to start doing experiments, collecting observations, and that enables you to refine your hypothesis and change your direction, iterate a little bit until you nail down on something that's more accurate. And the hypothesis I started out with was basically data science. So years before, I had started the machine learning course on Coursera, taught by Andrew Ng. And I didn't go very far with it because at the time I didn't have any coding knowledge pretty much. And when I came back from that summer holiday, I thought, okay, I'm going to start out. I'm going to do that course. I'm going to take an extra week off, and I'm going to stay home, do that course all day, every day. and see how I like it. See if this is something that I would consider doing. I did the course. It was very, very good, very interesting. I really recommend anything that Andrew Wing teaches, basically. But there was one topic on the course particularly. There was one short module on artificial neural networks that just completely caught my imagination. And after that module, I basically felt, okay, it's not data science. I refute the hypothesis of data science, but there's this thing that suddenly I became fascinated by, neural networks. Okay, I'm going to move in this direction. So that was hypothesis number 2. And the action point after this hypothesis was very obvious. This is a very big, very complex, very vast topic to which I'd only had a very small exposure. So I felt, okay, I need to know more about this. I need to study more. So what I did next was I found some more courses again by Andrew Wing, because he's such a good instructor. And I went and did a 5-course specialization on deep learning.ai. So these are all online Coursera-based degrees. And I went and did these 5 courses between September and December. And this I was doing part-time, basically weekends, evenings, etc., anytime I could find. And they were going really well. I was just becoming more and more interested in neural networks, and from the point of view of a neuroscientist, what sort of intuitions and ideas I could have to offer about this. This 5-course series was fascinating. They were really good quality. I learned a lot, but there were a few things that I realized. First, that this was definitely the thing I want to know more about. Second, that I felt like I was getting a relatively good background from the theoretical point of view, but I wasn't getting any practical experience. So, if you asked me to put together a convolutional neural network to recognize cats or something like that, I could understand in theory how I would go about doing that. I could not sit down and code something up. I just didn't know how. And that got me to realize also that if I really wanted to get into this, and especially to gain this practical experience, that doing this 10 hours a week on the weekends or something like that just wasn't going to cut it anymore. I was going to have to somehow find more time to dedicate fully to this if I was going to really take this study seriously. And the final thing that struck me at this point that guided my next step was that I knew the sort of general area, the general topic that I was interested in moving towards, but I had no idea about the role, right? So one thing is the topic that you're generally interested in. Quite a different thing is what roles exist. And within those roles, what are the roles that would be good for you as a person, right? So what are the goals where you can actually bring something from your background that makes you stand out and actually, get hired by someone and become good at something. And at this point, my next point of decision was, okay, I'm in the fortunate position that I have a fellowship and I'm paying my own salary. So I'm going to take a study sabbatical. I'm going to take 3 to 4 months out from experiments, finish off a few things, then take that time out and basically work full-time studying and gaining more practical skills. This was what I started doing already mid to late December 2019. Up until more or less March-ish, 2020. For this, I went with an organization called Udacity. And Udacity's whole thing, they're not free, they're a bit pricey, but they offer very practical, very hands-on project-based courses in machine learning and data science, artificial neural networks, and a lot of other topics. And their whole thing is precisely helping people who are not in that career gain practical skills and transition into such a career. They help you out with reviewing your GitHub portfolio, CV, LinkedIn, that kind of thing. So it was something that was quite helpful for me. Here I did a more general artificial intelligence programming with Python nano degree, which was very good in terms of learning how to use things like PyTorch and so on. And then I moved on to a deep reinforcement learning course, which was also very, very interesting and productive. And here I was taking care for every project that I was doing on this course to make a nice GitHub page about it, to have Jupyter notebooks, to basically treat the whole thing as a way to build a portfolio, like an artist or a photographer does, in order to show people that they're actually able to do the things that they're talking about. Here I would offer one general unsolicited piece of advice, which is that if you're ever in a position where you can use money to buy freedom, do that. It is absolutely the best use of money that you can make, if you're ever in the luxurious position of being able to. And basically what I started realizing here was that there was this nagging question that I kept asking myself, which was, okay, I'm getting excited by this artificial neural network stuff and machine learning, but at the end of the day, I'm a 35-year-old neuroscientist with 12 years research experience in neuroscience. What do I have to offer this field and any employer in this field that a 25-year-old PhD in machine learning can offer, very, very likely to a higher level than me? And here was where I started thinking, okay, the thing that I find really interesting about AI and deep networks is something that Andrej Karpathy once said about them, that they're neither less nor more than a new programming framework. Right? So instead of writing algorithms and functions and methods, you're programming with architectures, activation functions, cost functions, and so on. And this struck my imagination as a neuroscientist, because it made me think, okay, this is not the programming language of the brain, but this is the programming framework of the brain. This is how you build neural programs. And that got me thinking about brain-computer interfaces, which were, every neuroscientist knows about BCI. It's a fascinating topic, but it wasn't necessarily something I'd ever thought I'd get into. It felt like too abstract an area for me, but I started looking into it more. And I started thinking, okay, with the advances in deep learning and data science, I think this is actually going to be a huge industry. And I started thinking, right, what I want to do is, let's see if I can score a job in a startup doing something on deep networks, just to gain some experience, to learn something about entrepreneurship and starting your own company. And 3 years from now, I'll try and launch my own startup in brain-machine interfaces. Then I got a contact on LinkedIn from a very interesting young guy called James DeCombe, asking me if I was free for coffee, and that he was building a startup working on brain-machine interfaces. We had a chat, and I realized that starting a company 3 to 5 years from now in brain-machine interfaces was going to be too late. Basically, 5 years from now is when the companies that are starting now and started a couple of years ago are actually going to be putting products out there. So I realized, okay, this is a good idea, but I'm late. If I do this 3 years from now, I'm late to the party. I carried on having these conversations with James. I thought the things he was saying were very interesting. I was a bit skeptical about the technology at first, the particular technology he was planning on using. But I did my background research, I did my due diligence, and every time we spoke, and the more references he gave me and the more background research I did on the technologies we were hoping to use, the more convinced I became. And eventually I decided, okay, I want to be considered for a position of neuroscientist in your company in Comine. And when I did that, I realized, God, I really want this role. If I don't get it, I'm going to be gutted. They made me an offer. It was a generous offer. It was a very straightforward process, which was something that immediately got me on the right foot with the company. It immediately made me realize I can trust these people. They are direct. They are straightforward. They're not trying to rip me off. We're level. And the other thing that struck me when I was talking and interviewing with James and Christina, the CEO, was that, as anyone who's an academic on this chat knows, anytime you go through, when you're giving talks, when you're applying for grants, when you're giving job talks and so on, it's very much a top down. I'm judging you. I'm questioning if you have these skills, no matter where you are in your career, right? And I suppose in many aspects in the private sector, interviewing can be that way also. But with James and Christina, it was a conversation between equals. I felt that my skills, my background, my expertise were taken for granted. They were never. I don't know how to say this. They were never questioned in the sense of let's make sure you have the qualifications that you say you have. And this was another thing that struck me and that made me think, okay, this is going to be a good company to work for, because there's respect. So that's sort of I've been talking for a good while. That's sort of the continual story of how I got to where I am now. We can dissect some things more, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe let's get to the question.
Yeah.
Chat now. So I think the first question was from Anna.
Yeah.
Hi, Andrea, I'm interested to hear about how you moved your skill set from neuro to ML. That's something you covered more or less, right? So maybe.
Yeah, I would just structure my answer there a little bit just to make sure I address Anna's questions. So I learned Python first from my work with Adam Camp at the SWC. I did the general machine learning course on Coursera. From there, I went to deeplearning.ai for more theoretical knowledge. And in deeplearning.ai, basically you cover your typical vanilla neural networks. You go into convolutional, you do sequence models. And there's a couple of modules that are very useful in terms of how you actually apply these things to real world problems with advice such as, how do you know if the issue with your model is you need more data? Or how do you know if actually you've built the wrong model, your architecture is wrong, or your cost function? So these types of very practical pieces of advice that they offer, which now I'm finding very useful. At the time, I thought, okay, this sounds important, but maybe not right now. And then finally, I went with Udacity to gain more practical skills and to start building a GitHub portfolio to basically show potential employers I can do this. So apart from that, some background reading in terms of academic papers as well on the field. Only after I did a couple of courses, I was able to actually understand them. But yeah, that was pretty much it. Online learning and doing personal projects on the basis of that.
Okay, great. Shall we move to the next question?
Yeah.
So next question is from Marques-Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Andrea. Can you also throw some light on how students are admitted to PhD neuroscience field?
Yeah, neuroscience is interesting that way because I've met people in neuroscience from pretty much every single type of background. Anything from physicists to biologists, philosophers, artists, psychologists. So I realize that's not a very helpful answer, but I would say generally it's a very big field. It depends exactly what particular subfield of neuroscience you're interested in working on, whether it's more human cognitive work with neuroimaging, for example, or if you're interested in on the other spectrum, molecular genetics work. In the middle, you have cellular work, cells and circuits connecting to each other. You apply to programs or to projects directly. Generally, I think PhD programs are a good idea rather than applying straight into a particular project which is advertised, because the programs give you basically a year where you're doing basic courses just to make sure your background is level with everyone else. And you're getting a research experience. So you're doing short research rotations with different labs. And this really helps you both become a better neuroscientist, a better scientist in general, to learn more techniques and approaches, and to actually narrow down what the question that you really want to get at is. In terms of how you are admitted, I would say research experience is good. Every committee I've seen which has been assessing applications, this is always something they look at. You don't need to have papers. I think there's been a trend to people applying with papers already published, which I think is very unhealthy, to be honest. It raises the bar of competition to a point where, you know, people who are very talented but are coming from countries where they haven't had that opportunity would fail to hit that bar. This goes through cycles a bit. I think people are, you know, retracting a bit from this sort of level of demand, and they're looking more for people who are smart, people who've clearly spent a lot of time thinking and reading, neuroscience background, and identifying questions, important questions, you know. And you can do that as an undergrad even without any sort of experimental background. You know, you can do this on your passion and your determination to read and learn. And I would say this is a critical thing, you know, that you show in your cover letters, and in your interviews and discussions with the faculty, if you get an interview, that you're very passionate about this, that you know what you're talking about, and that you've identified a particular field in neuroscience and a particular question that really, you know, strikes your imagination.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's actually also an interesting topic, because I think that now, you know, in neuroscience there is a big boom. You know, there's like last 10 years where like times of neuroscience getting big, and there was a lot of money pumped from public sector into neuroscience, and unfortunately that doesn't serve good to the students, because like the amount of students went up every year, like linearly, but the amount of faculty positions didn't, and like now the competition between new graduates to become faculty members is even more harsh than it used to be 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's also like, I want to say that it's also like there is a lot of programs, and it doesn't mean that not every program is a good program. So
true.
So it also sometimes it's better to maybe wait longer and look for longer. Actually, I have a blog, and I have a post about that lined up for Friday. That is exactly for next Friday. Sorry, for master students who are thinking about a PhD. And that's the whole blog post is actually advice of what to look into and what to avoid. And I think that you know, PhD is also not as scarce anymore because of this like a boom for PhD. So the fact that you have a PhD is not a selling point that much anymore as it used to be 20 years ago, when it was really like unicorns. There's a few people in the society that have PhD. So just to have a PhD for the sake of it, I think it's not worth it. And you always have to think about it, because people who, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side. People who don't have PhDs think that this is something really cool to have. When you weight it with how many years of hard work you have to put into it, and personal sacrifice, and often, you know, this imposter syndrome and everything else associated, like you have to always think about if this is actually worth it or not. So, you know, before you even ask how to get my dream PhD program, maybe first ask, do I really need this PhD, and am I willing to sacrifice as much, and do I really see myself in science, or do I really think that it's necessarily the right way for me? Because it's really, there is as many good sides of a PhD as bad sides. So
and I would add to that by also asking yourself, what do you want to get out of the PhD? So to go into it with, and this, you know, it's a bit of an unfair thing to ask of someone who's just getting into research. The point of a PhD used to be to find out, or should be to find out, if this is what you want to do with your life, to learn how to become a scientist. But I think because of the factors that Natalia was asking now, it is an important question for you to ask. Do I want to do this PhD to become proficient in a particular range of techniques or ideas or approaches that will enable me to get a job in a particular sector of industry, tech or neurotechnology, for example? Or, you know, do I want to get this PhD because I want to do academic research, or I think I want to do academic research? And the two things are, you know, that they will point you in different approaches that you should take, different things that you should look for in the program and advisors.
Okay, so next question is from Miriam. How did you manage to move from the theoretical machine learning and deep learning courses to something more practical and perhaps useful? How can we be attractive to companies when we only have online courses and experimentalist background? Thanks so much, and thanks for doing this.
Very good question. So for me, this was moving to Udacity, which does more project-based courses. I'm not trying to advertise them or anything. There's other entities out there that do project-based work. But basically, well, you know, you're doing practical things in these courses, and you're putting them on your GitHub. You're making nice little Jupyter notebooks, very well commented, with all the cells running correctly and identifying what you're doing, theorizing a bit about why something is working in a particular way. A lot of people make Medium posts based on these projects. You know, it's a good way to summarize to yourself what you've learned about something and sort of start building a little following, a little online presence in terms of your expertise. Another thing that was very helpful here, and actually it was something fairly strategic that I did, which was doing this for reinforcement learning, because reinforcement learning has this cool thing where OpenAI set up OpenAI gym environments, which are, you know, basically video game environments where you train agents using different techniques in reinforcement learning and AI to basically beat the computer at a range of games, anything from, you know, Space Invaders to Doom or whatever. The cool thing about reinforcement learning is that because you're working in these simulation environments, it's not necessarily the case that you need to have a huge computer with a, you know, 10,000 pound GPU and gigantic data sets from Kaggle or whatever that take days to train your network on. You can actually do some pretty cool stuff, and you know, you can experiment with a lot of really neat little things in deep reinforcement learning with a decent, you know, average-ish gaming computer, or even a laptop, and, you know, go into AWS or use Google TPUs and that kind of thing. And I think having this, so that's the first part of my answer. So building up a practical portfolio, a nicely maintained GitHub page, the kinds of GitHubs that we have as scientists, that doesn't work. One of the things they want to see in companies is that you can work with other people, because you'll always be developing stuff as a team. So the time you spend commenting your code, documenting your functions, writing doc strings, all these kinds of things, this is worth it. They look at these things. They want to see this more than, you know, a piece of brilliance in how you solve a particular problem. It doesn't matter to them that you're that brilliant if no one's going to be able to work with you. Another thing I was going to say here is it depends on the companies. So one thing that I think, well, this was my experience, and this is also my personal perspective. I think startups can be very good, specifically for people who are coming from a different background, such as an experimentalist, and trying to get into something more like machine learning and deep learning. Because big companies, you know, you think of your Googles, Facebooks, Microsofts, Apples, whatever, they have this luxury where there's hundreds, thousands of people knocking on their door and applying every day. So any job posting, they have the luxury of being able to filter completely people who only fill out 100% of the requirements and then some on top of that. So they get to be able to look only for people who are already the finished product, regardless of potential. This is infuriating. It's very frustrating to anyone, because there's so much talent out there. But I would say an interesting alternative is look for startups in the field, trawl through LinkedIn, do a lot of background research on Google to see what interesting little companies are out there, because startups don't have that luxury. You know, they can pay well, but they're not going to pay the same as a big tech company. They don't have the same name and reputation, and not necessarily the same stability, obviously. But what that means is that they don't have the luxury of looking only for the final product, right? So they will take you on board, even if you meet half of the requirements or 60% of the requirements or whatever. They accept that you are going to grow with them. And more than ticking a box of technical requirements, the other thing about the startup is that in a small company, the person that you are matters a lot more. You make a couple of wrong hires in a startup and you're done. That's it. So there's other qualities, even if you don't, at that point in your life, even if you don't have the technical background, there'll be other things you can offer. You're a good team player, or you're someone who's very versatile. You can wear a lot of hats. You can. I don't know. In the case of an experimentalist, my experimental background has been extremely useful at Combine, actually. And I've been a bit of a journeyman in neuroscience. I've done a little bit of genetics. I've done a little bit of human work. I've done quite a bit of cellular and circuit mapping work. I've done some systems work. I wouldn't call myself a specialist in any of these things, actually. But because I've picked up a lot of different items here and there, this means that there's a lot of stuff that is now actually becoming quite useful, either stuff that I know or stuff that I'm aware about. So this background can be useful as well. It's not necessarily a drawback, so to speak.
I think it's also worth mentioning that PhD by itself doesn't really give you much. It just depends what you do with it. So it's more about self-navigation skills often. The same with any other education, and how you're able to combine your previous experience and to use your strengths in a good way, and find an environment where you can use your strengths, and avoid environments where you know that your weaknesses will come out. And so it's really it's true about every job. It's you have to first know yourself very well, and know what you're good at, and try to fit into a place where you can use specifically those skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's. I have a question, if you don't mind, because I always wonder. I myself had that very similar dilemma 2 or 3 years ago. My contract expired before I decided to do what I'm doing right now. Then I also, I had the training that was really technical, because I have a background in mathematics and physics, and I was doing also computational neuroscience. So I was programming during my PhD, and my CV looked like I would be just yet another machine learning engineer or data scientist, and wherever I was going, I was automatically classified as such. So even though I'm a people's person, but no one really looked at that, and I was automatically being given job proposals of a data scientist. And I was thinking, this was kind of a easy way out for me, because I had the credentials, and I knew that I would be paid well from day one, and I was really kind of welcome with open arms everywhere with what I had in my CV. But my one concern that I had was that if I do this type of job, I'm becoming non-fungible in a way. So whoever pays me for solving this type of problems, where I have to program something, it doesn't matter for them who does this, as long as it's doing well, it's done well. Either that you solve a problem and your solution works, or it doesn't. It's not the type of job where you can work out your personal style and put your personal touch to it. And that was the main problem for me. And I thought that it's hard to predict how the job market will be evolving, but I have a gut feeling that in the long run, people who have the professions today where they are actually able to put a personal touch into what they are doing, and they can put their name on it, like a graphic designer, a good graphic designer, it's like the same as, you can say, well, a graphic designer, same as a programmer, is working on a computer, right? But a good graphic designer who has unique style can actually leverage on their personal style, and then be recognized for their style, and be paid 10x, if they are actually respected for what they achieve. Whereas like a programmer will be always programmer, and it doesn't really matter in what style you're programming, right? So
Yeah.
how do you feel about this, that you it's like a non-fungible type of job?
A non
Fungible.
tangible.
So it's like, yeah, fungibility means that you are replaceable, basically.
In which job is which function?
Well, so like I think that many jobs that are related to coding and building network, so
Right.
these types of technical problems where you have to make a project of a solution that's some particular technical problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a lot on the context. I think in a small company like a startup, I don't think that's ever the case. I think it really depends on which person particularly you bring in, because everyone on the team needs to contribute to the common good. So you do get a lot more of the person's individuality in their their positive and their negative sides shining through. I think working in tech and deep learning, machine learning, there's a surprising amount of creativity that is required for these positions. There's a surprising amount of a mix of analytical thinking that you get from your background as a scientist and an experimentalist, even potentially. But there's also certain flash that you need to have in order to be able to look at the problem in a different way and solve it. And this is something where I think someone coming from a completely different background often has an edge. I mean, I'm sure I look at deep networks in a way that is a bit different. To me, I'm always drawing the comparison to neurons. They've changed the way that I think about neurons and circuits. And I've based my thinking on these things about thinking about these things in terms of my previous thinking of brain cells and so on. So I think it is a sector. It depends. I know what you mean, and I agree with what you're saying, that it can be like that. But I think it depends in the ramification of the sector that you're looking at and the context of the company. And I would add something related to what you're saying, which is and to what Miren was asking, actually, which is the thing where I think we can be attractive, which is that we tend to think of soft skills and hard skills, right? And we tend to think, okay, hard skills are called hard skills because they're really hard to get, building deep neural networks, linear algebra, this kind of stuff. And that soft skills are these floofy things that, doesn't really matter. It's easy, but it's actually the other way around. Because if you need to learn linear algebra, or you go and read a book and you study a book and you do exercise. If you want to learn about deep neural networks, do the courses that I've told you about. If you want to learn how to manage a scientific project on the time scale of 3 or 4 years, guess what? It takes 3 or 4 years to learn that. And it takes doing that in order to learn that. If you want to learn how to be able to absorb a lot of literature very quickly and summarize a complex field in an abstract, yeah, you can learn that. It takes you about 5 to 10 years. There's no book about it, right? And a lot of these things that we pick up in a tacit way, coming from academia and particularly experimental backgrounds, these are things that end up being surprisingly useful going forward. And I think it's important in making yourself attractive to companies in these domains to really reflect, be honest with yourself, be fair with yourself in recognizing how important these skills are and which ones you have, and explaining them actually in plain English, in your LinkedIn, in your resume, actually making that really, really clear. Because chances are you're so used to thinking in certain ways and having certain skills that you don't even see them as skills anymore, but they're actually incredibly valuable. Some of these skills are skills that I'm using heavily right now in my new position. I can say that.
Okay, great. Okay, so shall we move to the next question? Because we have quite a bunch of questions today.
Oh, cool.
Sarah is asking, I would love to hear a bit more about Comind as well.
Yeah.
The work they do and specifically your role there.
Yeah. So we're working on wearable brain-machine interfaces. We are both a hardware and a software company. So we're building prototypes to image the human brain non-invasively. And we think we have hit upon a particularly good technological approach to do this at a high spatial and temporal resolution, non-invasively. Said like this, it kind of sounds like the Holy Grail, and I'm afraid I can't go into details for obvious reasons. But basically, my role at CoMind sort of sits at right in the center of the company. So on one hand, I'm collaborating with our hardware engineers and electronics engineers and so on, who are actually building the physical prototypes. So they're the guys who know about integrated circuits, who know about optics and all these kinds of things, but they don't necessarily know about the brain. So they're working with me, and I'm telling them, okay, in order to decode a particular type of motor activity in a certain task, we will very likely need this level of spatial, this level of temporal resolution. We're going to need to record from these different brain areas. And you can start to see how these requirements shape the hardware development that has to happen, right? You can't just tell an engineer, build me something to image the brain. You need to fill out a spec sheet, basically. So that's one of my job requirements, working with them in developing this hardware. And the other side of my job is the actual more, well, what I told you just now is neuroscience. I was going to say the actual neuroscience, but this is neuroscience. But the other side of the work is the decoding work. So on the other side of the work, I'm facing the machine learning and AI side of the company. And here we're really looking at analyzing these signals that are coming from the prototypes, from the devices, and extracting their meaning. So, we'll have some demo tasks that we want to do. For example, we may want to decode the presence of to classify, for example, the presence of a certain visual stimulus based on on patterns of visual cortex activity, for instance. So there, again, I'm working with machine learning and AI engineers who are not neuroscience specialists, but they really know their stuff in deep neural networks and other aspects. Where I come in there is that I'm not a specialist like they are on machine learning, but I can speak their language, right? So I know the neuroscience. I can interpret what we need to do and what we need to decode and where we need to do it from and what the characteristics of the signals are from the neural point of view. And I can talk to them in terms of structuring our experiments, structuring our data collection, our data structures, and so on, and what types of decoding algorithms, what type of neural network architectures might be most productive for doing this. So really, through that dialogue between me and experimental neuroscientist who knows a couple of things about deep neural networks and can speak the language, and the expertise of the machine learning engineer who actually knows a lot about these things, that's where, the magic starts to happen. And I would say for any scientist who's potentially interested in this area of machine learning, deep neural networks, use your domain specific knowledge as a leverage. This is really important. Can you become an expert machine learning engineer at the same level as someone who did a PhD in that? Yeah, you can. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you can and can't do. You totally can if you put your mind to it and you invest the time. Yeah, for sure. But the question is kind of, do you want to necessarily? Because when you start applying AI to scientific data, to things like neural activity, decoding neural activity, collecting that data is not just expensive, it's really hard, right? Designing the experiments, collecting the data correctly, structuring the experiments so that your data and your model can actually generalize and be robust. This is very, very difficult. This requires a huge amount of expert knowledge about your domain of application. This is true for a neuroscientist working on brain-machine interfaces, as it would be for a chemist working on drug development, which, is something that AI is being applied very, very strongly to right now. So I'm really, I'm literally in the middle of the whole company. It's very nice because I get to see and understand what is going on all the sides. We all do, because we're still a small company, and that's a great thing, that you feel how your work connects to everything. But particularly for me, I've been learning a lot about hardware development and optics and signal processing, for example, frequency modulations and all these things that engineers do, which are amazing. And I've been sort of using my neuroscience background, picking up on the learnings that I've had from deep learning and machine learning, and learning from my colleagues who are experts in that as well, and furthering my expertise in that direction also.
Okay, great. And I think in the process we also answered Nicole's question about how to combine experimental and computational aspect.
I would add something very, very quickly to that, which is that I think on the academic side, in neuroscience, this divide is going to disappear. I think as an experimentalist, we've kind of been playing at scientists in neuroscience to be very, very harsh. You need better, you need more sophisticated, more quantitative theories for a field to really push forward, not just the sort of naive biological conceptual theories that we have. And people are getting trained this way, and Nicole and her generation are starting to be trained in these two aspects. So finding the right balance is going to be, I think it's going to be a personal choice based on your interest, but you're always going to have a bit of both in a proportion that, is based on your own passion.
And if I can add something to this, what I see also in just reading neuroscience papers in literature, I think that most of these are really good and impactful and groundbreaking publications were actually produced by people who kind of have both. Yeah. So experimentalists who are also very good with statistics and are able of analyzing their own data rather than just relying on someone else to analyze it. So
absolutely. Yeah, and it shapes your thinking. It really makes you think differently. I'm reading right now the Book of Why by Judea Pearl, and I keep thinking while I'm reading that book, I wish this had come out when I was 20 or 21, because it would have changed the way that I did science completely. I won't say more about the book. Google it and devour it if you're a scientist. It's a beauty.
Great. Okay, so shall we go to the next question? Mm-hmm. Nicole is asking, how did you deal with the feeling that you started off with less knowledge than other people who studied directly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I sort of went into it a bit already, but I'll summarize that. What I focused on was how could I leverage the 12 years that I'd spent doing experimental neuroscience in many different domains to put me at an advantage to those people. So I leveraged the domain knowledge. I couldn't beat them, so to speak, by knowing more about machine learning and AI than they did. It would take me years to get that. Eventually, maybe, I would, but it wouldn't be what I would want to do. What I tried to become was someone who, like I said before, who spoke both languages. And I think when you're dealing with career transitions, I think that's critical, to build something about you that is unique or unique-ish, that makes you stand out from the competition. And in my case, I think that was the thing that I highlighted, that I can speak this language. I can build models myself. I can code these things in PyTorch for sure. They're not going to be production level, no way. But I can build little things. I can make pilot experiments. I can test models, and I can build stuff that actually works. But what that means is that I can communicate, like I said, with these people. I can break down the neuroscience problem into a machine learning problem, and then I can collaborate with the machine learning engineer to actually achieve something that neither him or her alone could do, nor I alone could do.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Miguel. At Combined, can you work on your own projects and ideas? And also, how do you stay up to date with AI advancements?
So, we're a startup, we're a small company. We have a very well identified mission that everyone on the team is incredibly passionate about, but is a very difficult thing to do. So that's our goal. That's what we're working on. However, we come up with our own projects, with our own ideas, with our own hardware or software innovations to tackle this. We have brainstorming meetings and we propose research projects and discuss them. And these things come from individual people, and you can work on something that you need to be contributing to the overall mission. Everyone has things that they need to do at a certain time. But yes, you can spend time on projects that you build up to help us achieve our ultimate goal. And how to stay up to date on AI advancements is really hard. It's so fast. It's even worse. It's worse than neuroscience. It's just the speed at which stuff comes out. I'm already starting to feel outdated on a few things, actually. And, I was studying these things, at least in reinforcement learning, full time up until April. And there's some stuff that came out on unsupervised, contrastive and supervised reinforcement learning that I feel I should be reading about. And it's, I have like 15 browser tabs of stuff that I want to read. So tricky. I don't have a good piece of advice there, sadly.
Maybe that would be also a business idea, just a newsletter, just about that.
Actually, there is a, hang on. No, now that you say that, there is a thing which I find super useful. A newsletter, as you're saying, Deep AI. Deep AI sends you a digest of exciting, interesting papers and a little summary every week or whatever. And this is actually very useful. I would recommend that.
Okay, cool. And actually, I always laugh at new startup members, because like after as little as 2 to 3 months, they always start talking per we.
Yeah.
Always, like if you tell someone at the party and they say, like you ask, what do we do?
Yeah.
And they start saying, we do this, we do that, our product, our mission. That's a very clear indication it's a startup employee.
And not only that, but I would add to that a happy startup employee. This is the thing, when you have a small team and you build cohesion, this is what starts happening. People stop talking about I and me, and they start talking about we. And this is actually quite this is well spotted, but it's a wonderful thing. It's so different from how I was used to working in, by myself as an individualist, maximizing my research output, to actually feel part of a team and we're all, crunching in on this tough problem. It's great. It's wonderful.
Actually, it would be ideal if every startup is like this, but of course, it's not the case. So, actually spot some factors for success. Like, do you think that there's like one specific thing about your leader, or maybe about your purpose, or like anything else that you might point out as a potential reason why this is so?
I think it's the founders, it's the CEO and COO, and what culture they institute. In our case, I can say they're literally two of the nicest people I've ever met. Our CEO, James, is just, in 3 months, I haven't heard James say a bad thing about anyone. And it's genuine, he's genuinely just a really, really nice bloke. And nice people tend to seek people who have similar values. I'm not saying I'm very nice, I'm not. But they tend to be good at building environments that you want to work in and which bring out your better qualities. So it's people, again, it's people. Even in tech, it's people. It's all about people.
Well, that's also, I think it's actually two things. So the way I see it is probably a combination of personality, but also competence, because also a lot of startups, they, if you somehow manage to get your first investment, get through this first like seed phase, then sometimes people who are not very competent actually make it through, and then they are able to create this startup culture, and it's great to drink with them and talk about ideas, but when it comes to execution, they are not necessarily, they also have to be authority for you, able to, they have people delegate their work to you, because they don't have the days too short for them to do everything, but in principle, they would be able to do it too. It's just that they have to delegate, but not people who are actually clueless, just, have these high level ideas and like let all the work to their people, right? So they have to be specialists too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're very right there. Their ability to, how they structure the work, how they manage, how they do the project management, and the planning. Yeah, absolutely. They can be the nicest person of the world, but they can end up putting you in a situation that is impossible and will destroy you. So yeah, you're absolutely right there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let us Okay, so like maybe the next question should be, do they have any vacancies? Because maybe there are, after, maybe some of the participants are already checking out the LinkedIn.
We have some vacancies at the moment.
We have.
Yeah. I think we're still looking for a signal processing engineer. And I think we're still looking for an optical engineer, I believe. But check on our website. We've been keeping the job posting more or less up to date. There will be more space for neuroscientists probably later in the year, but I don't know right now. Let's see. At some point, I'm not going to be enough, that's for sure. But I don't know.
That's a good news, I guess.
Yeah.
In the light of what was said before. Okay. Next question is from Lucky. Any recommendations for choosing a good mentor?
It's a great question. So people tend to go for the really big names and the really senior people. Well, I was going to say guys, and it usually is guys, sadly. Consider young labs, consider small labs. They will have much more invested in you as an individual. If you're one student in a lab of 50 people, you're not going to be doing your PhD with the lab head. It's going to be with some postdoc, which may be really good or not. If you go to a small lab, they really have an investment on you. Everyone needs to succeed in a small lab. Another thing I would say is try and see if the PI is still doing experiments, and if they're not, do they seem really sad about that? Because that's a really good indication. Those are the people who are really gonna, they're going to be very passionate. They're going to help you a lot. When you have technical difficulties, they're going to come in and be like, okay, I'd rather fix this rig than be marking exams over there. So let's do it. Talk to not just to the current people in the lab, talk to people who used to be in the lab. They in theory, they don't have anything to gain from saying good or bad things. But from a human point of view, people usually want to talk. If someone's been very good to them, they will want to say good things about that person, and they will want to repay that, right? And if someone's been very bad to them, they'll want to to prevent someone from making that mistake. So don't underestimate. Talking to current people can be difficult. There's a big conflict of interest there. But look for people who did their degrees in that lab and approach them, and they will talk to you for sure. They will make time. 9 times.
Well, I could add to this that if you want to know about like the dirty stuff about the person, then you can always ask something like, can you tell me 3 good things and 1 not that good thing about the person? Then they will probably tell you what they didn't like, because they will kind of excuse themselves and also say some good things. So they will feel less bad about this, so that they will be more honest if you ask this way.
Yeah. I think that's a really good trick. Yeah.
Okay, so next, we still have a lot of questions, guys. Next question is from Nicole. Did the actual practical work match the expectations you had of it based on the theoretical knowledge you gathered from the courses?
Yeah, I would say so. Actually, I think that's a good thing about Andrew Ng's courses. Andrew Ng is, he's a Stanford professor, but he's a Stanford professor who's worked with a lot of companies, and he actually has a lot of, commercial and industrial expertise and experience. So he brings that even though his courses are more theoretical, they're less project-based, he always brings those practical pieces of advice, which are things that I find myself now thinking, that's what he meant. This is what he was talking about. So, yeah, I would say so. And by their nature, I mean, most courses on programming, AI, and so on, you're learning how to make something. You're learning how to build something. You're not learning about, let's say, quantum mechanics, right? So they're already, by definition, even though it's theoretical, it's already kind of practical. Yeah.
Okay. I will skip some questions that are very similar to the questions we had before, if you don't mind. And the next question I would like to ask Andrea is from Gaia. Are startups a better place to begin with compared to bigger established companies?
Good question. I can only speak from my experience. For me, what I felt very deeply was this was the right thing. because one of the key reasons I came into academia actually was I didn't want to be just a cog in the machine, right? I wanted to do an individual contribution to something that no matter how small it was recognizable. It was me, and only me could have done that. And again, to me, startups feel right because they have this element. Because I feel if it was Andre in this role, or if it was Gaia in this role, they would be doing different things. They would go in different ways, and the company would go in a different way. Not better or worse, just different. In a bigger company, there's a lot of established culture. There's a lot of processes. There's a lot of, I think in many ways, very big companies end up having a lot of things in common with academia, potentially. I say that not having worked for a company like that, but there's things I see that feel very, very similar. And I've got friends who work for very big companies, and some of the stuff they say, the type of politics that are, there's a certain type of politics and organizational behaviors that starts happening when a company grows above a certain range. And it stops being human at a certain range. We did not evolve to deal with networks above a certain number of people, and some human activities just don't scale well. So I would say, from a bias point of view, I think they are. There's a bit more. I think it's easier to get the foot in the door in a startup, and then you may or may not fit well in the particular logic of a startup. But as getting the foot in the door goes, it's something that can at least enable you to gain experience. To then, maybe a more corporate thing is right for a different person, sure, and the startup, even for that person, can be a launch pad. Yeah.
If I could add something to it, it's like primarily these are two very different cultures. So it's also a cultural problem. It's different tribes, and the rules are different. So it's like many people feel better in startups, but I also know people feel better in corporation, because every corporation is a bit like little research field, and you have to work on your own CV, your own portfolio, take care of your own promotion, and you have options. So you have to kind of apply for positions and apply for and take courses and make sure that you're visible in the company. So it's like a very similar career in a corporation, as Andre mentioned, is very in many ways similar to academia. And the only difference is that you have a contract that doesn't have the end date. So that's, in that sense, it's safer. But in other ways, you are still exposed to heavy competition, and less of a teamwork and more of a self-promotion than startups. So, but this again, the startups also have downsides. For instance, it's a small place where usually you're kind of hardwired, pegged to your boss, direct boss, and there is no, if you don't connect with your direct boss, then there is no way around it. You cannot really be shifted somewhere else because the company is too small. So other modes of failure in a startup than in a corporation. So it's again, this is really a cultural problem. So it's also up to you to discover what type of rules fit you and your susceptibility to stress better.
I think you nailed it. That's absolutely.
Okay, so next question from Marques-Smith. Is it possible to get into PhD without earlier publications in formal fields you were in?
Yeah. I didn't have any. It was a while back. I revealed my age already, so it's fine. Of course, these things change. I got into my PhD in 2008. It goes through cycles, like I alluded to before. I think there was a peak. I'm talking, mainly about the UK system here, but there was a peak maybe 5 years ago or so, where suddenly there were undergrads who had second author Nature or Science papers. I saw some of these CVs and I thought, this is ridiculous. This is an anomaly. It's not fair on anyone, and it's clearly a product of the fact that you were fortunate enough to be born in, I don't know, let's say the United States, and go to Harvard for your undergrad and do a project rotation in the lab of a Nobel Prize winner. And if you're coming from India or Spain or Portugal, or a country that doesn't have the same economical investment in science that some countries are fortunate to have, it's very unfair. So it is possible, I would say, to this day. You need to have very good letters of recommendation. You need to show in your CV I would say, a real commitment that you've tried to involve yourself in research projects or to get research experience throughout your undergrad, and that you've spent clearly a lot of time thinking about these topics. You need to write a really good cover letter, a very smart cover letter, where you home in on a really good scientific question and you bring an original spin to it. That's the other thing that really impresses people. That you come in with a different way of thinking, where you're not simply regurgitating a review paper. So yeah, I would say. And also the thing is that the academic world is also a bit more varied in terms of locations than people tend to think. So, we all have in our heads institutions like MIT and Stanford, Columbia, and so on. But there's a wide range of really good universities in countries that some people don't even necessarily think that much about. Switzerland is a fantastic place to do science. Spain has a couple of very strong institutes. Portugal has the Champalimau. There's a few great places in France. So it's really about what is the work that you want to do, and where in the world are the people who are doing really good work in that area. And yes, they might be in one of the elite institutions, but they might be in an institution that people don't even necessarily think very much about. But if you go and do your PhD there, you'll do really amazing things. So the competition level to get in terms of, competing against people who have papers already might be lower, but you might actually be getting into a better situation for you.
Okay, great. Next question is from Maria. Hi, Andrea. I'm a neuropsychologist in Delhi, and at some point I want to have my own startup in neuropsychological rehabilitation and therapy. Do you think that having a PhD in neuroscience would be helpful on the next logical step?
I think if you do a clinical focused PhD, and particularly focused on neuromodulation, on using techniques like TMS, transcranial electrical stimulation with alternating currents, ultrasound is starting to become a really big deal. If you do a PhD which is targeted and is teaching you skills which are going to be useful for your startup in neuropsych rehabilitation, then yeah, I would say. But go into it very focused, try and come up with ideas for a project that you would like to do, so that is really useful to you as a person and as an entrepreneur when you start that next stage. And yes, I think it would, I would say it would be helpful.
Great. And do you have any, that's from Jessica, do you have any recommendation of courses or projects specific for BCI?
Look at OpenBCI. They've got some data sets. They used to have competitions, actually, OpenBCI. They're a very interesting organization. But they have data sets on which they had challenges to see whether you could decode, finger tapping movements, these types of things. That's an annoying thing about BCI. There isn't there's maybe one or two textbooks which are like BCI 101. There's one called Introduction to Neural Engineering by Bin He, B-I-N space H-E. And this is a really good resource. It's from 2013 already, so it starts to show a little. And there's another by Walpole, I think, W-O-L-P-A-W. It's a husband and wife team, I think, and they also have a really good textbook on BCI. In terms of courses, not something that I know about, but this is going to change very, very quickly, I would say. This is becoming, neural programming is going to be a topic, actually. It'll be cool.
Okay. And I would like to say that I totally support all the endeavors to start a company as a researcher. It's really cool to have a company, I can tell you. And but it's pain as well. Actually, I made a resolution after I started the company that every time I fail at something, I will do crunches, and I grew a 6-pack in 3 months. So it was very quick. So good luck. Anyways, next question from Alexandra. Hi, Andrea, would you have considered switching to a job in academia working on BCI or neuroengineering? Or do you think the startup environment is better aligned with your goals or interests? And if so, in which way?
Good question. Not really, because to me a key part, actually, if I had to pick one thing that was the final thing that maybe made me flip and decide, okay, that's it for academia for me, was this individual versus team mentality. I started realizing, okay, I've been publishing pretty well in neuroscience, and the project I was doing at the time was going in a really good direction. But I started looking at that project, and that project was like a sub-example of a phenomenon which I was generalizing to a larger process in cognition and neural information processing happening in the brain. So I was starting from the top and then going on to another thing and then going to a very specific implementation of that thing. And that's how you do, if you're working as an individual, that's how you do, that's how you have to do it. There's, no matter who you are, how talented, if you're working 16 hours a day, there's only so much you can do as an individual. From the moment you have 5 or 6 people in a team, it doesn't even take more than that, but they're working on the same project and their interests are aligned and they're working equally, then the type of stuff you can tackle, the size of the question you can tackle, it's completely different. You can really truly take on the really, really big problems. So I think working on BCI neuroengineering in academia is fascinating. I think there's some really, really great labs doing completely fundamental, beautiful work. But it's still this logic of each person has their baby project. Yeah, they collaborate on some stuff, but collaboration means I'll do some stuff for you, you do some stuff for me in your paper. It's not real collaboration. That's not what the word means, right? And the startup environment isn't like that. You need people to align and become bigger than the sum of the parts. And to me, it just felt like, okay, the size of question that I actually want to spend the next 30 or 40 years of my life working on, I cannot tackle that size of question in an academic institution. That became very, very clear to me. I could only tackle a little bit, and that wasn't enough anymore,
Okay, great. Next question is from Samuel. Andrea, do you think that what you gained by switching from academia to industry is something generalizable to other fields, including other non-neuroscience fields within psychology?
I think so. Definitely this team aspect of things. Another of the things that I feel I've gained that is a difference is that I learned a lot from my previous colleagues in my previous labs, for sure, especially at SWC. But they were still all neuroscientists, right? And now I'm working, with optical engineers, signal processing, electronics engineers, and I'm having to read things that I'm, completely unfamiliar with. I'm picking up all different kinds of knowledge and skills. I feel I'm picking up knowledge at the same pace I was picking it up in my PhD in the beginning. And, I think that is part of what you get from potentially from switching from academia to certain types or certain fields of industry. I don't think this is, it's not a neuroscience specific thing. And there's a lot of, psychology is a very hot deal right now, with social media, algorithms, and all these attempts at manipulating our behavior through clicks, and people who are using that knowledge for the good also, not just the bad. There's also very nice works going on in these areas. So yeah, I don't see why it shouldn't generalize.
Actually, I have a question, and because you are so positive about your new job, and it's actually, I see that often in people that for the first few months, if they switch fields, it's like a honeymoon. They are like just like on drugs, just
like Tom Cruise on Oprah. Yeah,
and exactly like jumping the couch and singing under the shower. And actually, yeah. So, do you think that this is this enthusiasm, just this honeymoon effect, or do you think, this is because you really found your way of living, and this is going to last?
Yeah, I think it will last. I think it's because I found somewhere where I have a huge degree of personal compatibility with the people I'm working with, which I've had before, especially my mentor, Simon Butt, from my PhD. It feels a bit like that time in terms of personal compatibility. And I've also found somewhere which is I found the niche for my role. I found the niche, this intersection of artificial intelligence and neuroscience. It turns out it does exist. The thing I dreamed about, and it's only going to exist more and more now. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. So this is not to say for sure there'll be harder times in the future. I'm sure. Every relationship goes through ups and downs, but as long as you both still want to come back and meet in the middle and go forward, and I think that will be the case, unless we screw up very badly. But I don't see these critical things that make me happy at the company. I don't see them changing because they're core aspects.
Actually, I recently also wrote a blog post about my own honeymoon with my new job. So I just put the link in the chat in case someone is interested. So I have exactly the same state of mind that is a bit a bit like drunk always, and since quite 2 months.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if it lasts. I hope so. I think so also. I'm quite positive about it. Okay, we have 2 more questions, and after that we'll be wrapping up because we already over time. But it's a really interesting conversation, so I didn't really want to cut it short. So, a question from Alessandro: now that you're working at the company, do you still envision yourself starting your own company at some point? Do you ever consider joining startup schools programs like Entrepreneur First?
Our CEO did Entrepreneur First. I've heard good things about it. One day, starting my own company, why not? I wouldn't say no. I'm 100% focused and 100% committed and dedicated to what we're working on right now at Comine. But do I like the idea of starting something from scratch? Yeah, there's a certain almost romanticism to it, which appeals to me a lot. There's challenges associated with that, obviously. I don't know if it's something that someone, in their 40s, for example, might have necessarily the energy at that point for, but I don't know. It sounds cool. I think one day, yes, I would like to find out how that is and how that feels like.
Actually, there was some research about how was the success rate of companies given the age of the founders, and actually this grows linearly with age. So, actually people who are more like life experience are surprisingly. So this myth of 20-year-old, unicorn founders, it's a myth. And usually, actually, people who are more reasonable, life experience, and better connected and older also actually are more successful. So maybe it actually makes sense waiting.
That makes complete sense. Wait, I was going to say something about this that I forgot. Sorry.
But I also had to say this is what I also see in people is that once you have that thought and you really try to put yourself in the shoes mentally of an entrepreneur, this is like a bug in your brain that will never leave your head until you try. It might itch you for years and years, but eventually you'll want to try. That's something I see also, that you might struggle with it for 10 years or 20, but sooner or later you'll try.
And I remember now what I was going to comment, which is one of the good things about working at the company is that it demystified something. I used to think that to start your own business, be it a startup or not, you had to have the idea and you had to know everything about the idea, about implementing, right? You had to know somehow how to build a really micro version of everything that the company is going to do. I've been realizing that's completely false. You don't need that. You need to have the idea, you need to understand it conceptually and know what you're getting into well, but then you need to hire the people who complement your weaknesses to actually get it done. Then you go and hire the electronics engineers and the neuroscientists and the data scientists and so on, who actually know how to do the specific things, but you have the general view. And realizing this and seeing the way our company and our CEO work has been very, very empowering, and you just get this feeling that coming from academia, there's a lot of gatekeeping, there's a lot of stay in your lane. You know, you don't know about this, you don't know about that. This is our field. You don't come in here. Who are you to come up with an idea? How dare you, right? Have an original thought. And the culture where we work and many other places is just completely different. It's more like, you know, why not? Try it out. Maybe you're onto something.
Yeah, it's also actually, it's true that in research we are supposed to perfectionize our projects before they get published.
Yeah.
Really, they have to be really top-notch and impeccable to be published. But in startups, it doesn't work like this. You just make the most rudimentary version, like minimal working product, and put it there and put a price tag, and then play around with the price tag so that people are actually willing to buy it, and then just listen to the users, but you try to get user as soon as you can and put the price tag as soon as you can. So it's just a completely different. It's just like literally like jumping to the deep water and swim.
And I think sometimes people misinterpret this as not being rigorous enough or something like that. And it's not about that. The thing is, it's two different things. In academia, every single detail could potentially matter. You don't know. It could. So you spend a huge amount of energy and time going into every single particular detail that could conceivably matter. And that means you end up, you know, losing a lot of time on stuff that ultimately in the end didn't really, you know, you didn't have to care for. In startups, and maybe even, I don't know about corporate research, but in startups, it's definitely the case that you need to be focused, that at every point in time, you need to be asking yourself, okay, what am I trying to achieve with this? What is my focus? What am I trying to get out of this task? And you're separating, you know, the wheat from the chaff at every point of the way, because you have limited time to get somewhere. So you need to cut corners, but the wisdom comes from knowing which corners you can afford to cut and which are just going to lead to a loss of rigor. So you end up making some, if it works right, you end up making some kind of magic where somehow you end up doing something pretty good in a surprisingly narrow amount of time.
Okay, great. So let us proceed to the last question, which is from Nicole. Do you think academia might change at some point into a more collaborative environment? I wish I knew that too, so I'm curious about the answer.
I think it'll have to, if it wants to survive. That is, I think there's a lot of areas, artificial neural networks and artificial intelligence in general are a good example of a sector where the state-of-the-art advances are increasingly coming from outside the ivory tower. People are still getting trained in there. I don't know for how long in that field. In neuroscience, with the emergence of neurotechnology, neuroengineering, neuroprogramming, this is also going to start happening. In other fields, I don't know, but it's going to have to become a more attractive, less toxic, more merit-driven environment to survive. And it will survive because it's been around for a long time. So chances are that it will, but it will have to adapt. So I think so. And, you know, to end on a more positive note, one thing I would say is a lot of discussions that are, you know, happening a lot right now about open science, data sharing, open publication, and so on. These are things that during my PhD were complete, you know, they weren't nearly as discussed as they are now. I don't remember having those types of discussions when I was working on my thesis. It wasn't a topic that was thought of as importantly and discussed as much right now. And that shifted a lot in 10 years. BioArchive didn't exist, you know, back in the day. So even though it's a very slow, very conservative sector, that's a lot like a very ponderous elephant picking very well where it's going to put its paw, sometimes it changes surprisingly quick. So maybe there's hope.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that if academia still is interested in keeping the good people, then they definitely have to change because they don't have enough edge at the moment to keep them, actually.
Yeah.
Which you are a good example of, I think.
Thank you. Very kind.
Okay, so I think that was the last question. So thank you. I would like to thank everyone. Maybe one last chance to Andrea. If you would like to say just anything, like from your own perspective, any piece of advice that you could give to young researchers that you would like to ask to all these insightful things you already gave us in this webinar?
My dad commenting. Thanks, Dad. There's one very specific piece of advice that I do want to share because someone gave it to me and I thought it was particularly good because I would never have thought of this, is go to recruiters, go to recruitment agencies, get your profiles, your CVs, once they're in a good state, get them with these agencies. So a lot of companies, especially big companies, their first screen that they do through the CVs is exclusively through a big HR outsourcing group. And the way those companies work in HR is that they want to employ you. You know, if they think you've got an attractive profile, they get commission on placing you somewhere. So if you build a good relationship, a good rapport with a particular network of recruiters, this can be a really, really powerful way to branch out your profile into many companies. In general, I would say, you know, we tend to think of our potential as humans as a fixed thing, right? You know, it's sort of a glass of water, which can be more or less full. But we tend to think of it as a bit static, right? You reach your potential or you don't. And this is really not true. You know, what you can achieve in your life, where you can get to depends so much on the mentorship that you're getting, on the environment which you are, on the amount of self-confidence that you build because of those two things. And you know, for the football fans or for the sports fans in the audience, you know, think about Moneyball. Think about José Mourinho winning the Champions League with you know, a bunch of people who could barely run in a football club of Portugal. When you think about this, you really start realizing, on one hand, it's not all up to you, you know, and that's a bit frustrating. It means you have to place yourself in the right environment with the right people. You need to have a good mentor. You need to have a good network of people to learn and draw inspiration from. But the other thing it means is that no one can tell you what you can and can't do, really. If you take this into account, you can become, you know, sky's the limit. I truly, genuinely believe this. So I would end on that more inspirational note, if you will.
Very fantastic. Okay, thank you, everyone. Then first of all, of course, thanks to Andrea for his great insights, and thank you, everyone, for participating. And I see already a lot of thanks notes in the chat. Okay. Yes. So, if you still have some questions for Andrea, I think he would be happy to take on these questions through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to reach out also on LinkedIn and just poke us and connect with us. That's always, you know, something that you should get out of every social meeting like this one. That's one advanced to your network already. So take the opportunity, and thank you so much, Andrea. A very, very deep conversation today. Amazing. And yes, so I hope to see you some other time on some other occasion. I'll be also tracking your career through LinkedIn and other media, and like I would bet €100 even today that I will see you as a founder of your company today. I think I smell some entrepreneurial gene there. I would bet that. Okay, so let's see. I'll actually see if I was right.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Natalia.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.